panel Q&A session. So there's already been a few good questions coming through Slido, but it's not just limited to Slido. There is a microphone. So if you bear with us and you have a verbal question to ask, put your hand up and a microphone will come to you. So please take the stage. And do we have, well, we do have a couple of questions up here, but maybe we'll kick off with one from the audience if anyone has one. Does anyone have a question that's burning? There we go, down the front here.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
It's on? All right, brilliant. Lars from HKA. I think there's no question that security with the amount of connected devices is paramount. So how could we, what's the panel's view on how can we teach our children in the way we teach them to lock the door at home? How can we teach them to stick to the basics, as in changing password of the router or things like that?
Cyber safety.
Yeah. I'll start, because I literally have to give this kind of presentation tomorrow and Friday. So as I said earlier, we have two businesses, enterprise, consumer. So a lot of what we do in the consumer space isn't technical at all. So literally my presentation for the next 2 days is, what do you need to do to teach your kids and your family and keep them safe? It's basic things that we all, so I Stay Smart Online Week this week, the government actually has 5 tips. That's actually a good start. But yeah, it's password hygiene, it's things like, don't click on links, and beyond that, it's psychological things as well. So I'm not gonna give you all the things, because you can read it. I think if you look forward as to how technology can help, given we're a technology provider, those buzzwords you keep hearing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, whatever else, if you use English, it basically means, and I think Peter KPMG alluded to it, if you use digital assistants to help a little bit while the parents maintain accountability, there's a lot of things you can do around using best practice science to feed into the technology for them to say, okay, well, this is the optimal amount of time of screen time you want to give to your kids. And by the way, you shouldn't be clicking on that link, so we're not going to let you. And it looks like your behavior isn't ideal, so I'm not going to let you do that. So I think technology can help a little bit, and then beyond that, there's just the basic things that you've already just articulated.
Just to add to that, so thanks for doing all the hard work. The other thing I think is that we need to demystify what cyber actually means. And for kids who are a lot more digitally savvy than when we were their age, I think that we need to give them information that understands not just about safety, but about the appropriate use of the information, the connectivity. So I think as parents or carers, we need to actually sit with kids and actually explain to them what could go wrong and what are the things that they could do to not be in that situation, or if they are in that situation, where do they go for help? Who do they talk to? And I think we need to start at that level because they are generally more savvy than we were, and probably more savvy than some of the people outside of this room. So I think we need to raise the bar, demystify, not use all this tech jargon, and just say to them, look, if it's Facebook, use things that, using the technology they're used to, using Facebook to say, well, you wouldn't tell Facebook in a public way where you live. Right? You wouldn't sort of leave that level of breadcrumbs, and this is why, this is what could happen, and if this did happen to you, particularly it is Safety Week, if this did happen, this is where you go to help, and please come and talk to me in the first instance. Or, I think it requires to sit down with the kids and actually go through, and it's not once, it's not twice, it's actually probably quite frequently for them to understand, and then it becomes second nature because they are digitally native. And I think that's important.
Isaac?
Well, in Israel, we started educating children how to behave in cyberspace, including social networks, etc., in elementary schools some 3 years ago. It's part of the regular curriculum. Like we do with teach them how to cross a road. When you don't teach them how to drive a car, you don't teach them how to write a code, but you teach them when they are very young how to behave in this new world. In high school, we teach them already cybersecurity. We teach them computer science and coding. But if we speak about elementary school, is how to behave in this world. The way I see it, it's only a matter of time. I mean, they will grow with it. I have grandchildren. He came to my house looking from the door. Door is made of glass to the garden. He saw a tree, and then he approached the door and did something like this. On the real window, it's not windows. It's a matter of time, I think. In high school, when we teach cybersecurity, some 30% of the hours of the curriculum is devoted to what we call ethics. Again, it's how to behave, what is allowed, what is not allowed to do in this area.
Okay, I've got one from the app now. How to calculate the costs of data being possibly compromised. Do you know that if you lost it, and do you know how much it was worth?
Yeah.
You go first.
I was just going to say, I think the first question is, do you know what the data is, and do you know where it is, before you even calculate the cost? Because if you don't know that, then on what basis are you making that assessment? You also need to also understand what is the potential threats on that data, so then you can then model what those costs could be to either, take it back wherever it may exist, clean it up, and then do all the necessary notifications if that was the case. And that's part of some of the pre-work before you even get to a cost.
So as far as costs are concerned, so I've actually done costs modeling for cyber risk. There is a way to do it. It's tied to probability and risk management. So if you don't know anything about risk and probability, if you want to calculate data breach exposure for cost, that's where you start. It isn't as easy to do as, which is why everyone asks this question, as some other areas of cost in terms of ROI and efficiencies and so on. There are public figures, so if you go to the Verizon data breach report and Pernomon, there's all these public places where they give you, they update it every year. The cost of an average record loss, I think, is $141, and the average data breach costs $3 million, right? These are global figures. And you can break it down into each country. And they're a good start if you just want something to just throw at your board or your C-level just to give them here are some scientifically proven data points. You can start to get into statistics. Actuaries can help you. Basically, it's the emerging area of cyber economics to calculate the specific threat scenarios that you are most exposed to, and for each of those things, which data, bits and pieces and assets are exposed, and what that's worth. And you start to feed in things like cost of acquisition of customers, reputational damage, legislative and fines, and so on. And you basically feed that up into the mathematical model, and you calculate the probability of that happening, and a number spits out. I make it sound easy, but it's not. But there is a way to do it.
But it's also inaccurate. Sorry, I'm going to say one thing. It is inaccurate, though, to even use that too broadly, because if you looked at certain incidences where, the target breach and a few other instances where organizations obviously let the bar down when it came to security, and they had share price drops, and you could maybe even use part of that for discussions with boards, but then their share price rebounded. It was just a matter of time. Now, that wasn't necessarily due to some fantastic security effort, but that's the market forces playing out. So I think you have to be careful about the data you use and for what purpose. Sorry.
That's right. I'd just like to take a slightly different approach to that. There was a huge change in recent years in the way security is perceived at the board level. The fact that they even know what it means today is kind of amazing. But I think what they understand today, and they being C-level executives, is that the cost of data loss is their career, essentially. So if they're breached, significantly breached, and you see this all the time, CEOs, board level executives, they will be fired. And so the cost for them from a certain point is 100% everything personal. It's not about it's also about the share price and things like that, but when they're making these calculations today, they're looking at the Equifax CEO standing in front of a congressional hearing, they say, I don't want to be that person, so I don't want to lose anything, right?
Unless you look at his 90 million payout figure,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's why I said we're a bit of an immature industry still.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got one here for you, Isaac. How do you balance the need for security and the ability to deliver solutions quickly? So balancing security with the need for delivery. Is it possible?
it is possible, like it's done in any other field, which is not as new as cybersecurity or IoT. I mean, you build a building. You don't first build the building and then live there and then call some experts to make it resistant to earthquake, something like this. If you do it, it's too late, especially if you live in Japan. You have to put what we call the security by design. You have to take it into consideration from day one. Now we are now in the area of emergence of IoT and things like this, and people don't put too much attention to this. But this is only temporary. It's very clear. Once everyone will have items and products, and you'll be, as a customer, you have to choose, should I buy this one or that one or this one? Probably I'll take into consideration, this also is relating to the cost issue. I'll take into consideration those which are more secure. I mean, take security into consideration and pay more for those which are more secure than others. At the end of the day, it's all about human talent, like anything else in our life, but here especially. And you need the right people and the right education to carry it out.
Adi?
It's a time to market issue, right? And companies are, I mean, security is still, maybe it's the cost of doing business, but it's not the revenues, and we can't expect everyone to, focus on security all the time. And if you take, for example, HBO and the hack, I expect HBO to make Game of Thrones and not to make, security. That's what they're supposed to be doing, and that's fine. I think the answer, when we look forward a few years, is it's going to be more about security platforms. You're going to have to use a platform that from a reputable vendor that does invest most of its resources on security, and you'll build on top of that a layer that is maybe by design less secure, but the impact will not be as powerful as it is.
I think also is a bit of a mind shift change. So if you look at IoT, you're getting a lot of vendors and manufacturers on the market that are producing low-cost sensors, right? Trying to put high-end security on those, the economics don't stand up. So it means that you need to think about, still your threat models and your risks, but rather than necessarily putting all of that on the edge, what you might actually be thinking is a different architectural approach, where it might be a gateway that acts as the intelligence brain, and it regularly looks at those endpoints and says, are you malicious? Are you what I recognize? Do I trust you? And you sort of break down the problem a little bit differently, because I think that to expect that really good security happens at the edge at every instance, particularly in an IoT world, at this stage, I just don't see that happening. I just don't see it stacking up. So we've got to take a really different approach until we get manufacturers raising the bar, and until we look at liability for manufacturing and software assurance, all those sorts of things. There's going to need to be a bit of a hybrid approach to how we do this, particularly in an IoT context, because of what you're dealing with. So.
Great. Let's take another one from the floor. Is there someone whose hand is itching? There we go, over there. Thank you.
Hi, this is probably referring back to the slide from Daniella's with the connected car. It's a good model that I've used myself, but using the light post as an example is who does actually own the data. And it becomes interesting when you talk about cybersecurity as well. You're trying to protect data, but ultimately the data is also going more to public by default. Does that mean you take more of an approach of read-only data, and it gets more complicated too when you're making decisions from data for triggering other things, plus the organisational boundaries around who owns the data? How does this, I'm trying to get to a question. How can you see these converged systems that are codependent on each other, generating data, but also making decisions based on the data being generated, working in a secure environment when they're also inherently public?
I would argue that in some cases they're not inherently public. We think they are because we don't understand the data. And And I think the public consciousness of privacy will increase as it becomes more of a personal liability, and we start to see that. I don't think we've cracked that nut. And in some respects, I'm looking forward to some of the privacy technologists actually stepping up, and there are some things happening in R&D at the moment around privacy-preserving technologies to enable analytics and data sharing happening at scale, but still enabling privacy and that control in a user's hands, so whoever that may be. I think it's still not quite mature. There are some things tinkering on the edges, but it comes down to, if you look at that example I gave, you really need to understand where is this data coming from. It might actually even be a person that owns it, or it might be another vendor, it might be another government. And it comes down to partnerships, collaboration, and looking at those privacy models. I don't think we're that mature as yet to implement that. And it's why I was calling out the need for an ecosystem approach. In New South Wales and Victoria, I think they've established things like the Digital Analytics Centre. There's discussions around how do you deal with open data. And I know Tony Braxton-Smith this morning was looking at transport open data. So all of those things are starting to come about where we're asking the question, because we don't have the full answers. We have yet to work out what we actually want to do with this information and what elements we need to protect. There are some things that we're doing outside of R&D. There is a number of SMEs and startups that have looked at encryption. I think Enveil was one that this year at RSA did a major debut, former NSA encryption experts. Those sorts of things. People are starting to think about it, but they're not deeply thinking yet. And until we do, I think we've still got a whole bunch of unanswered questions we haven't solved. So, sorry, long-winded answer.
There is an intrinsic tension between privacy and security, which will never disappear. I mean, what we can do is try to find the right balance. And I'll give you one example, but usually, you take, for example, this case of Snowden and the NSA. After the revelations of Snowden, the chief of NSA went to the Hill and said that the allegations are not true, but because the NSA doesn't really read the content of the messages that were monitored, relating, of course, to American citizens. This was the problem. But looking only on the metadata, the traffic of the bits, who sent what to whom. And he had to resign because no one believed him. And we asked ourselves when we built the system in Israel, why no one believed him? Why people trust Google or Facebook more than they trust their own intelligence services? You can argue with this, but this is a fact. You have to take it into account. And we came to the conclusion that no one believed him because really it's impossible to succeed in the main task of NSA, which is to put a hand on the terrorists, to prevent the terrorism and catch the bad guys. It's impossible to do it without reading the content of the messages in the net. So no one believed him, he resisted the temptation. The way we build our capability in Israel, I'm speaking now about national capability, not an organizational or within the enterprise. The way we build it, we build the authority, which has to protect the network as a kind of, it is not part of law enforcement. It doesn't have any task in life to catch the bad guys, doesn't interest it. Its only task in life is to clean the network from malware. Like a medical doctor, you go to sometimes with a disease that you are ashamed to tell anyone that you have it. You go and tell your medical doctor because it doesn't run and tell everyone that you have this disease. Its only job in life is to clean your body from the viruses, real viruses, not the cyber viruses, but the biological one. And if he has a suspect, and he doesn't ask you where did you get it from and whom, and if he has a suspect that this virus may be some kind of epidemic or something like this, he has to report to a different agency in the government, and they have to go with the evidence to a judge and get a court. Let's say I'm cleaning up, now I'm looking at the bits in the network and cleaning it, and I have a suspect that it all comes from that point, this address, okay? I have to go to a different agency, let's say the police. Let's say it's about bank robbing or something like this. I have to go to a judge, show him the evidence, get a court order that will allow me to monitor if the evidence is convincing enough. Allow me to monitor this address. It's not this authority. And we work like this for a few years now, and at least for the time being, which is too short, it's only 2.5 years, at least for the time being, it seems successful in the sense that people trust it and join it. I mean, this is the only measure. People trust and cooperate with this authority.
Great, thank you. Well, that's the end of the session. I hope everyone enjoyed it today. Thank you very much to Isaac, Ian, Daniella, and Adi.